listen to the radio, listen to
Yahala Voice.
You are now listening to Imprint with Nesreen on Yahala Voice.
It's time for Imprint on Yahala Voice. I'm your host, Nesreen, and our director, Hibba Mahmoud. Imprint brings you individuals that have left imprints for us to learn and benefit from. Listen to us live on www.yahalavoice.com. Our guest today on Imprint is an Arab-American writer and stand-up comedian that infuses his experiences growing up as a child who has parents that are Palestinian refugees. He just published his book, Being Palestinian Makes Me Smile, and is currently working on a documentary titled We're Not White. It is my pleasure to welcome Amer Zahr on the show. It's great to have you with us, Amer.
Well, thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Well, Amer, you've been very busy, and I want to talk to you about a few of your most recent works and ones that you're still in progress with. Let's start with your book, Being Palestinian Makes Me Smile. I want to first congratulate you on completing the book. Why don't you tell us a bit about it? What inspired you to compile these articles into a book?
Well, I just always thought that, putting everything together would be a kind of a good idea into the journey I've gone through over the past 4 or 5 years with my blog and the kind of the letting Americans know a little bit better of how we Palestinians think and feel and how we laugh and cry just like anybody else. And so I thought it would be really good for Palestinians, Arabs, and non-Arabs to really read and get a better insight into who we are.
So you write about your views and experiences. What is it like to be a Palestinian-American comedian?
Well, it's difficult in the sense of, not that we're not funny, we are, but it definitely leaves you on the outside a little bit in mainstream American circles. Just being a Palestinian and Arab. It's not something that gets you in quickly to comedy clubs and that sort of thing. So I end up having to create a lot of my own projects, which I've done. I've created a few of my own comedy tours, the book, the film that I have coming up. Mm-hmm. So being an Arab American or a Palestinian entertainer kind of means you have to forge a lot of your own path. It's not as easy as if we weren't, that's for sure.
Now, the conflict between Israel and Palestine is definitely hard to speak about, but how do you go about shedding light on those issues?
Well, there's humor in everything, and everybody laughs, and people think we Palestinians don't laugh, they just think we cry all the time. Mm-hmm. But we laugh too. Actually, in the introduction of my book, I write that we've seen somebody laugh so hard that they start crying. But we've seen somebody sometimes also cry so hard that they start laughing.
And that's definitely something that stood out to me, and I really wanted to focus on that as well. I wanted you to elaborate on that. How are they similar?
Well, it just shows that the emotions aren't that different, right? I mean, if you can switch from one to the other one so easily, both of them are about a deep emotion, and both of them are about matters of the heart, right? You only laugh if something really touches your heart. And the same thing is with crying. The emotions aren't that different. And sometimes the same situation can make you do both.
But what do you do when some individuals feel as if you went too far? I mean, how do you respond to that?
A comedian's job sometimes is to push the envelope, go to the edge a little bit, see where you can take your audience. Audiences are always willing to go a little bit further than maybe what they tell you, mm-hmm. and Arab audiences especially. Arabs, we have these, we have this public life and this private life, right? Everybody's different at home than they are out with their friends and out with everybody. We do that maybe a lot more than anybody else. Well, as a comedian, I kind of bring the private life to the stage. And what people might think is going too far is really not going too far. It's just bringing how we feel privately to the stage. And comedy can be used as a way not only to maybe educate others about us, but maybe also sometimes to educate us about ourselves and to make us look inwards a little bit and see what's going on with us and maybe correct some of the things we can about our own community.
Now, you speak about being Palestinian throughout your skits over and over again, and it's evident that you're proud of being Palestinian. What makes you any different than any other comedian that might be Arab but not Palestinian?
Well, look, every comedian has their own style and their own voice and their own point of view. I happen to be pretty out there in the way that I talk about things. That doesn't mean I can't talk about things in a way that is accessible to everybody. But there's a lot of Arab, Palestinian, and Muslim comedians out there who sometimes take the safe road and sometimes will not talk loudly about who they are. I happen to be one of those Arabs and one of those Palestinians who thinks that whether you like it or not, it's a responsibility. And you have to be out there and you have to say things.
Now, the book is a compilation of your articles, correct?
Yes.
Why did you start writing those articles to begin with?
I mean, simple enough. I've always been a writer. I used to be a writer for a school newspaper a long time ago. I didn't write for a while, and then, I saw a few people having blogs in 2009, and I said, this might be interesting. And I didn't really do it for a long time. Until one night I was watching The Daily Show, and Jon Stewart had a Palestinian activist and another person who were on there talking about the Palestinian situation in a positive way. Mm-hmm. And I did not, I hadn't seen this forever. You ever see this on TV, and Palestinians especially, we get very excited when we see something like this on TV because we're so used to the opposite happening all the time. Mm-hmm. And watching the news, I always tell my white friends that watching the news is like a social activity for Arabs. We call our friends, we make popcorn, and we watch the news because we're on it. And this night was no different, even when it's the fake news with Jon Stewart. So there was Mustafa Barghouti actually was on, mm-hmm. and I was watching it, and I said to myself, I'm having all these emotions, I'm having all these ways that I think about things as things are happening on the screen, and maybe I can be a little funny about it. So why don't I write it down? That was my first blog post in November of 2009. It's also the first entry in the book. It's kind of what kicked off the blog writing. And now it's a pretty well-read blog. I write of all kinds of issues pertaining to Palestinians, Arabs, Muslims, whatever might be going on in the world. And I write about it from my point of view. And I try to throw some jokes whenever I can.
So, Ahmed, let's talk a bit about your upcoming documentary, We're Not White.
Yeah.
What's your goal with the documentary?
Well, the goal, in a practical way, is to get a box for Arab Americans on the 2020 U.S. Census form. We Arabs don't have a box on the census form or almost any application in the country for that matter. And what happens with all applications throughout the country, actually, is they usually just copy whatever categories are on the census form set by the federal government. And we Arabs don't have a box. We've never had. Mm-hmm. Everybody else has a box, and we don't. And the United States government actually classifies us as white, legally. So the idea is we're not white, of course. I mean, white people don't think we're white. Your white friends don't think you're white. We didn't save all our bags as children because we're white. We didn't do everything that we did because we're white. We didn't pick leaves from the backyard to eat for dinner because we're white. And we're just not white. We're different. We deserve our own categorization. There's people whose communities are much smaller than ours that have boxes on the form.
But
ironically, when we tried to come to this country 100 years ago, mm-hmm. the only way you got in was by being white. So Arabs actually fought to become white legally about 100 years ago. And now we're trying to reverse that because it simply doesn't define who we are accurately. And in a world, in America, where everything is racialized and minority groups have certain statuses, we should get a box, and we should get those kind of statuses, especially when we're not just some group that kind of just flies by the wayside. We are Arabs. We're on the news all the time. They know who we are. Socially and politically, we might be more visible than any group in the country, but without a box, we remain kind of legally invisible. So the point of the movie is to put out that message. A lot of people are shocked when they find out we don't have the box. We interviewed lots and lots of people in the documentary. It's fast-paced. It's funny. It has a message as well, though. And so the idea is to educate people about this issue and hopefully spur people to talk to their government officials and get us a box for the next census, which happens in 2020.
Now, Ahmed, some may say, what's the big deal? Why should we care about what we're categorized as? What do you say to that?
Well, look, here's what happens when you don't have a box. When you don't have a box, nobody knows exactly who we are and where we are. So in Dearborn, Michigan, where I live, which anyone who's ever been here, they know it's like the Arab Disneyland, right? There's everything here. If you want to be a really, really crazy Arab, you can have a hookah, a falafel, and a demonstration all in one day. So, but this city is 90% Arab, but according to the U.S. government, it's like 100% white. Mm-hmm. So it gives inaccurate readings of where our community is. We, as Arab Americans, don't even know how many of us there are in this country because we don't have a box. And there's power in numbers. So we guess 3 million, 3.5, but the number could be much larger than that. And politically, that's a very important thing. And what also happens is that congressmen never know how many Arabs are in their district. So when you have a congressman who says something really dumb about Arabs or Muslims, which happens every day, and which happened like a year ago in Illinois, I think, around Chicago, there's no one to walk up to that congressman and say, congressmen represent 750,000 people in their district. So there's nobody to walk up to them and say, well, hey, congressman, maybe you shouldn't say that. You have 50,000 or 60,000 Arabs living right here in your district who vote for you. And so when we can't get together and know our numbers, we lose any sort of political power in this country. And so politicians don't know how many Arabs there are in their district, except for maybe the 10 or 20 or 30 that might show up at a restaurant to give them some money for a fundraiser. Other than that, we have no real numbers to really show anything. That's one problem. Another problem is that we don't get considered for any sort of minority assistance, minority small business loans, any sort of financial, benefits that other minorities might get, getting into college, whatever it might be. And we are discriminated against. There's no question about that. So that brings up the third thing, which, since we don't have a box, there's no easy mechanism to record and keep statistics about hate crimes against Arabs in this country, which happen all the time as well. So they get reported individually instead of being reported collectively and being seen as a pattern and being seen as some way that we can break them down and see when, why, and where they're happening. Without the box, we are subject to much more discrimination than we need to be, and we don't have the tools that every other minority has to fight the discrimination against them in this country. And for Arabs who think that they're white, you're not. Okay? No matter how hard you try, no matter how much you change your name to Mike or Mark or whatever you try, you are not white, and the white mainstream American community is never going to accept you. They might act like they are, but when you walk out of the room, you're just the Arab that walked out of the room.
Why haven't the census forms been changed yet? I know Arabs have been living in America for decades and decades. Why is it now being brought up? Why hasn't it been brought up in the past?
Well, like I said, we fought to become white a long time ago, and we won, ironically, to become white and get into this country. So the legal status stayed like that for a very long time. And then no one has really brought it up as a main civil rights issue. To me, it's the most important civil rights issue that we have as Arab Americans, because without the box, we're just invisible, and it means we don't count. So I think there's also been especially in the leadership, quote-unquote leadership of their Arab American community over the last 30 or 40 years, they thought, well, let's not rock the boat. Arabs are afraid of causing too much trouble sometimes because one of the biggest fears we have is being seen as unpatriotic, and we never want that to happen to us. So a lot of Arab leaders didn't want to rock the boat, and they said, well, maybe if I act white long enough, white people will accept me. And that didn't happen. That way of doing things has proven to be a failure. The Jim Zuhdi way of doing things, of shaking hands with leaders and hoping that one day they let you in the circle, it hasn't worked. We have to become very comfortable in our own skin, comfortable with who we are, and get out there and understand that we're in the middle of a civil rights movement and fight for it. I just happen to be doing it with jokes.
Now, I know that you had a comedy tour named We're Not White as well.
Yes.
Is it based off of the same comedy tour?
Yeah, the comedy tour that I did called We're Not White was probably, I did that comedy tour first maybe like 3 or 4 years ago. And the material from that show is a lot of what's in this documentary. People think comedians come up with like new material every week or something. That's not true. We try out lots of material for a long time, and then finally we get comfortable with a show that might be an hour or so long, and we perform it for 4 or 5 years. I mean, people think we come up with new things all the time. We're not that smart. It takes us a long time to come up with an hour that everybody thinks is funny.
Now, Ahmed, I know that you've had a couple teasers out on YouTube for this documentary, and one of them indicates, do you know any famous Arabs?
Yeah.
How does this tie into the documentary?
Well, this is the idea of not having a box and not having your own place in this society. So what happens is I think sometimes the people who do become famous that are Arabs, when the government is telling them that they're white or that they don't really have their own place in this mosaic of America, they sometimes shy away from saying loudly that they're Arab. So a little bit later in the movie, I start telling some of those same people that were in that clip that you saw that about people who are Arab, and they're shocked. They know who these people are, but they had no idea that they were Arabs. And so without that place in society, without that box, we are not on the same level of recognition as other minority groups. So we might feel an internal desire to fly under the radar, and then we also have the government telling us that we don't have our own place. And so all these things being put together leads to invisibility of the good things that we do, and a much higher visibility, of course, of the bad things we do.
Definitely. Now, Ahmed, I want to talk a little bit about one of your articles.
Yes.
It's titled A Letter to Israel from a Sympathetic Palestinian.
Yes.
In this article, you talk much about how they feel and such, but towards the end, you show that you are being very sarcastic. Now,
yeah, sometimes I do that. Yeah.
I mean, I think that's very evident. Now, I know that many individuals, when they come across certain things such as this, they might look at you as if you are racist.
Okay.
And I know you touched upon that in the introduction of your book as well. Are you racist against Israelis?
Well, no. Every Palestinian has to give this disclaimer that we don't hate Jews. Of course not. But that is never the issue. If Netanyahu was on the news today, I think, saying about how the boycott and divestment and sanctions campaign is anti-Semitic. Because this is what they turn to whenever they're losing the argument. And the truth is, if you're having a discussion with somebody and you call them a racist, the discussion's over. You can't talk anymore about ideas. Having to declare that we don't hate Jews all the time is a silly exercise, And when I do bring it up in the introduction of the book, that's sarcastic as well. You know, we shouldn't have to say anything like
Definitely.
that. But the pro-Israeli lobby and other Israelis have done such a great job in this country of painting Israel as a voice for all Jews. And actually, that's anti-Semitic. You know, I mean, Jews are not a monolithic group. There are a lot of Jews out who side with the Palestinians on almost every issue. So Israel does not speak for all Jews. Israel speaks for a certain segment of Jews who happen to come and colonize our land. So the two are not synonymous.
So what do you do? I mean, how do you find a common ground between Palestinians and Israelis?
To me, it's actually the simplest thing in the world. Other than clearly they enjoy our culture. I mean, when you open up an Israeli cookbook, it's full of falafel and hummus and baba ganoush, and so they clearly like our food enough to take it. So they're comfortable with the culture. If you go to a beach in Tel Aviv, you'll find young Israelis sitting on the beach, eating sunflower seeds and smoking hookahs. They're becoming us, which is okay. You go to the checkpoints, which I've been to many times for many hours, and the Israeli soldiers, while they're speaking Hebrew, they'll throw in some Arabic slang words every now and then. So they like our culture. So they don't have a problem with the culture, so we have that in common. But the real thing we have in common is this. If you go to the website of the Israeli Ministry of Tourism, or you ask any Israeli, actually, to draw their country, they will draw that familiar triangle all the way down the Jordan River, including the West Bank, up to Gaza, and up the Mediterranean coast. That triangle, which is also the same exact map that we Palestinians wear around our neck, get tattooed on our shoulders, and draw all the time when we draw our country. So in our hearts, or in our minds, we are both drawing the same map. So it doesn't make any sense to try to cut it up and make different countries. Let's make one country, you know, and let's all live together. It's possible. And if you ask most Palestinians, like privately living in the West Bank and Gaza, they would be okay with having freedom of movement throughout their whole country if that meant that they had to hold an Israeli passport. And the real issue here, though, is that Israel is not ready for this kind of thing. We Palestinians probably came to terms with the fact 25 or 30 years ago that whatever solution comes about, it's going to include us living with them. They're not going anywhere. While on the Israeli side, they're still having conversations to this day about how they can get rid of us. And that really puts them in some alternate universe that makes it sometimes difficult to deal with them and have dialogue. That's why I wrote an article I wrote about a month ago. It's actually the last article in the book called The Failure of Israel, where I said basically Israel's a failure because it has bad relationships with all of its neighbors. It doesn't know what to do next. And it hasn't achieved its one major goal, which is getting rid of us. You know, and we are very stubborn. We stay around, and they have not been able to get rid of us. And that fact alone means that Israel's a failure. And this idea of the boycott, diversion, sanctions has brought up something where they say, well, look at the Palestinians. They're now actually participating in nonviolent resistance. And that's not true. We've been participating in nonviolent resistance since 1948. Our presence is nonviolence resistance. There is still half of the world's Palestinian population is in Israel, the West Bank, and Gaza. They have not gone anywhere.
Now, with your
and so
ideology...
we are there and we're present.
Go ahead, you could continue.
Go ahead, I'm done.
Okay. I was going to say, given that your ideology is that Israel and Palestine should be one state.
Yeah.
Do you believe that that will occur?
I do. I believe that it is eventually going to happen. Let me tell you what's going to happen. Write this down, Nesreen. This is very important. This is going to show in 10 years that Amer Zahr predicted everything that happened in Palestine and Israel. Okay. Number one, we're not going to get a state. That's not going to happen. Okay. What's going to happen is that Israel is finally going to decide that they're going to take the final step and absorb the West Bank and probably the Gaza Strip too. And then they're going to turn us Palestinians who are in the West Bank and Gaza Strip into semi-citizens, half-citizens. Maybe they'll say, well, these people live here and they have citizenship, but their vote only counts as a half, or something like that. Something like crazy apartheid stuff from like the 1770s in America when blacks were 3/5 of a person. Something really crazy because they don't know what else to do. And they're going to try, because a lot of people say Israel is apartheid now. They haven't gotten that far yet. They're not apartheid yet. Apartheid means you actually write it down and you say that you are a racist country. Israel acts like a racist country, but Israel has no constitution. So they have never had to address this issue of the equality or inequality of citizens on paper. So they're going to do that. But that's not going to last very long. That might last 5-10 years. Because it's 2014 and everybody has Twitter and smartphones and video phones and things move very quickly, and you just can't have an apartheid system like that anymore. But they're going to try. They're going to do their best because they believe that they can make it work. And then that system will go away because the world can't stand for it. And then there will be a single state where everybody is an equal citizen under the law and no one's religion makes them better than anybody else. And if that should happen anywhere, shouldn't it be Palestine? I mean, we have, the cradle of the three religions, and we have an economy that could live forever if everybody could just get along.
Now, I understand what you're saying. I'm just trying to think how Palestinians, hardcore Palestinians, would feel about that.
Well, first of all, it's better than the status quo. It's better than this puppet Palestinian leadership that's running the West Bank now. I mean, Abbas the other day said that, he's not really going to push the right of return on the Israelis. I mean, this guy's like totally out of touch. So, nobody really enjoys living under the Palestinian Authority. It's corrupt and it's terrible. And Palestinians need to have freedom of movement throughout the whole country. So I really do believe that if you said to Palestinians, you're going to give up this idea of your own state. It's either you become a citizen in the entirety of the land of historic Palestine, or you can become a citizen in this thing we're going to call the state of Palestine, which is going to be some sort of Swiss cheese state in the West Bank where you really don't have, it's really not going to be much different than your life now. I think everybody would go for it. And yeah, maybe it'll be called Israel in the beginning, and maybe 10 years from now, it might get called something else when the president is a Palestinian. Who knows? But it's the idea of having one secular state. It's the only just solution, even for us Palestinians. Ironically enough, having our own state in some cut-up thing of the West Bank with a road connecting to Gaza, that's not just. That's not justice.
Definitely.
What justice to us is to live freely in our entire land as we did before 1948. If that means that there's also 5 or 6 million Jews living there too, that's fine. We don't have a problem with that. We are not a racist people. We have been sometimes put in the position of having to defend that stance because of Israel. I mean, it's so funny. Sometimes I'll talk to some of my Palestinian friends' dads. We didn't used to say racist stuff 50 years ago, but Israel kind of turned us into saying stuff that sometimes sounds racist. I mean, hasn't everyone heard the Palestinian dad who says something like, Nesreen, I don't hate Jew as people. Just like if there is one Jew, I am okay. But but when you put a lot, I don't like it.
Definitely.
And one of my dad's friends said that to me the other day, and I said, Ammo, that's racist. You can't talk like that. And he gave me the answer that a Palestinian gives. He goes, well, it's not racist because they hate me too.
I think that's
they mess with our mind, man. We have a Palestinian psychosis.
Mm-hmm.
We have something wrong with us. You know, that's why we have problems. I mean, look what the Israelis did. The Israelis turned us into these crazy people. In 1948, when a Palestinian would leave his house because of the war, and he would try to come back after the Israelis took control of the land, the Israelis would tell him, well, you were absent, so we're taking your land. And then the Palestinian says, okay, but I'm present now.
Mm-hmm.
And the Israelis said, okay, then we're going to call you a present absentee. So what, a present absentee?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. And they said, yes, we're going to call you a present absentee. And then the UN came along and said, you know what, and we have an idea too. We're going to call you internally displaced. Internally displaced. So we live in this world where we are present, absent, internal, and displaced all at once. So yeah, we're a little confused.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? And we had to live like this for the past 65 years. That's why I said in my letter from a sympathetic Palestinian this week, I said, you know, I might be only 36 years old, but I was born in 1948, just like the rest of us.
Definitely. Now, Ahmed, I want to segue to your most recent work. At the moment, you're on tour, and you're going from state to state. Tell us a little bit about the comedy tour.
Well, I mean, I go and do shows where I get invited. I'm also putting together some shows of my own. A lot of the shows I'm doing now are based on a show that I have written that is called In 1948.
Mm-hmm.
It's all about being Palestinian and the mindset that we have and all that kind of thing. And so, yeah, I go to many places and do that show, a lot of times for Palestinian crowds, but I really like doing it for non-Palestinian crowds. Mm-hmm. So they kind of get a better idea of who we are and how we think.
What is the reaction?
You know, people are always enlightened. I mean, you know, I love using comedy as a way to tell our story. I mean, people have to laugh, first of all. You know, it's called 1948 because, you know, that's the way my dad used to start every sentence. You know, no Palestinian can start a sentence without saying, in 1948.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, you know, this is the way that they're programmed. And this comedy show kind of goes through that journey of my encounters in Israel of being a Palestinian, my experiences in America being a Palestinian. And it really identifies us and I think humanizes us a lot more. So for people who are not Palestinian that watch the show, mm-hmm. I get reactions from them like, you know, wow, I never knew that. And they get to know us more as people instead of these, you know, caricatures that they put about us on the news all the time.
Now, is Chicago on your list in the near future?
Yeah, you know, I performed. I am going to do a show in Chicago. I've performed this show in Chicago for a couple private events, but I plan on coming to Chicago in the spring and doing this show hopefully on a larger scale for the Palestinian and non-Palestinian community out there in Chicago.
Mm-hmm. Now, what else is coming up for you?
Well, you know, when this documentary comes out, I plan to get pretty busy because I'm going to tell you, this documentary is going to hit hard and it's going to be controversial, hopefully, and make a lot of people think. And it is going to be something that I think really wakes up the Arab American community and the greater American community as a whole to this very important civil rights issue facing Arab Americans. I don't think a lot of non-Arab Americans view the Arab Americans Arab American group as a group that is in need of civil rights and that is in the civil rights movement. And, this all goes back again to us not having a box. So we really need to push this issue and make sure that we get a box by 2020. And I think that's going to really create a lot of buzz. And the movie should be out, but I would imagine by the end of March there will be a completed movie, and we'll start doing some showings around the Midwest, and then I'll hopefully submit it to festivals and see what happens.
Definitely. Well, I'd like to thank you, Amer, for being with us once more on the show Imprint, and I wish you the best of luck.
It's been my pleasure. And, my website is amerzahr.com if anybody wants to go to it, AMERZAHR.com. And my blog, The Civil Arab, civilarab.com. I need supporters and I need followers so that the Israelis don't shut it down.
Definitely. And once more, I thank you very much. And we were with Amer Zahr, an Arab American writer and comedian. If you haven't picked up a copy of his book, Being Palestinian,